There are some stories that linger in the air like a curse, stories whispered late at night but never spoken in daylight. This is one of those stories. If you're watching this, remember, some objects aren't meant to be touched and some things aren't meant to be owned. It began in a quiet town, where a young woman named Ayesha stumbled upon something unusual at a flea market. Among dusty porcelain figurines and rusted trinkets lay a small box lined with faded velvet. Inside it sat the Labubu doll, a wide-eyed creature with sharp little teeth frozen in a perpetual grin. Its matted hair was tangled, its stitched body frayed, yet its glassy eyes gleamed with something far too alive. The seller, an old man with trembling hands, seemed eager to part with it. "Take it," he muttered, almost as though he were begging her to relieve him of a burden. Against her better judgment, Ayesha bought it. When she carried the doll home, strange things began almost immediately. The air in her apartment felt heavier, the shadows seemed to stretch longer. That first night, as she placed the doll on her shelf, she could have sworn its eyes shifted toward her bed. She dismissed it as nerves. But then came the scratching. Soft at first, like nails grazing wood. It grew louder after midnight, a relentless scrape against the walls. Ayesha searched the apartment, but nothing was there. Each time she returned to her room, the doll seemed slightly repositioned. By the third night, she woke to the sound of tiny giggles echoing in the darkness. When she looked toward the shelf, the Labubu doll was no longer sitting, it was standing upright, its grin wider than before. Sleep became impossible for Ayesha. Every night, the doll seemed to move closer to her bed. Sometimes it sat on the shelf, other times on the chair by the window, and once, horrifyingly, she woke to find it resting on her nightstand, its glass eyes inches from her face. She tried convincing herself she was imagining things. She hid the doll inside a locked drawer, but by morning it always reappeared on the shelf as though it had never been touched. Even when she left her apartment, she felt it watching her. The sound of faint footsteps followed her down the hallways, but when she turned, nothing was there. One evening, her best friend Sana visited. Ayesha laughed nervously and showed her the doll, half hoping Sana would dismiss her fears. But the moment Sana picked it up, her smile faded. "This thing feels wrong," she whispered, shuddering. "It's too warm. Like it's alive." She placed it back quickly and refused to touch it again. That night, Sana stayed over to comfort her friend. But at 3 a.m. Ayesha woke to the sound of Sana screaming. She ran to the living room and froze in the doorway. The Labubu doll was sitting on Sana's chest, its tiny stitched hands pressed against her throat as Sana clawed at the air for breath. Ayesha lunged forward, grabbing the doll and hurling it across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening crack but didn't break. Instead, it landed upright as though it had braced itself for the fall. Its grin seemed wider, its glass eyes glowing faintly in the dark. And then it laughed. A shrill, high-pitched giggle that echoed through the apartment, freezing both women in terror. The morning after the attack, Ayesha and Sana barely spoke. Neither of them slept, and both avoided looking at the doll, which now sat quietly on the shelf as though nothing had happened. But the memory of its laugh hung heavy in the air, a sound too real to dismiss. Desperate for answers, Ayesha searched online for anything about the Labubu doll. At first, all she found were harmless references to collectible toys, but then she stumbled upon a forgotten forum thread. The title read, "Never Keep the Labubu, Cursed Object Report." Her pulse quickened as she scrolled. The post, written nearly 10 years ago, described a woman who bought the same kind of doll at an antique fair. Within days, she reported hearing scratching, laughter, and seeing the doll move. Weeks later, her family found her dead in her home, her face frozen in terror, her eyes wide open. The doll was never found. Ayesha's hands trembled as she read further. The legend claimed that Labubu was no mere toy, it was created as a vessel. Some said it was stitched together during a forbidden ritual, meant to trap the spirit of a mischievous demon that fed on fear. But instead of binding the spirit, the doll became a doorway, allowing it to cross into the human world. Sana urged her to get rid of it immediately, but Ayesha shook her head. If it's cursed, throwing it away won't stop it. It'll just come back. She could feel the truth of that in her bones. That night, she dreamed of a child's voice whispering in her ear, "Don't leave me. If you try, I'll follow you forever." When she woke, the doll was lying beside her in bed, its cold stitched arms wrapped tightly around her wrist. By now, Ayesha's apartment no longer felt like home. The walls seemed to breathe, the air smelled of burnt fabric, and shadows lingered in corners long after the lights were turned on. The doll was no longer content with silent torment, it wanted more. Every night, the giggles grew louder, multiplying into a chorus of laughter that echoed through the halls. Ayesha often found herself standing in front of the mirror at odd hours, though she couldn't recall walking there. Sometimes her reflection lagged behind, moving a second too late, with the faint outline of the Labubu doll perched on her shoulder in the glass. Sanaa begged her to leave the apartment, but when they tried, something terrifying happened. As they reached the front door, the lock jammed. The walls shook violently, picture frames crashing to the ground. A childlike voice shrieked, "Don't leave me." Both women dropped to their knees, covering their ears as the laughter rose into an ear-piercing scream. When it finally stopped, the doll was sitting at their feet, its head tilted, its grin wider than ever. Days blurred into nights. Ayesha stopped eating, her eyes hollow, her mind unraveling. She began speaking to the doll, whispering like a mother to a child. Sanaa tried to snap her out of it, but the more she pleaded, the more distant Ayesha became. One evening, Sanaa woke to find Ayesha standing over her with the doll cradled in her arms. Her voice was soft, eerie. "He likes you, Sanaa. He wants to play." Before Sanaa could move, the doll's stitched mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that had never been there before. It lunged forward with inhuman speed, and Sanaa's scream was swallowed by the sound of gnashing jaws. The apartment fell silent after Sanaa's scream. When Ayesha opened her eyes, she was alone. No blood, no body, just the doll sitting neatly on the couch, its grin soaked in fresh red stains. Her heart pounded, but she couldn't cry. Instead, she reached out, trembling, and held it close like a child. From that night forward, Ayesha stopped fighting. She dressed the Labubu doll in little clothes, spoke to it, laughed with it, even set a place for it at the table. Neighbors began whispering how they saw her through the window talking to something that wasn't there. Her laughter, once warm, now sounded hollow, broken. But the doll wasn't finished. Wanted more. One rainy evening, a neighbor heard frantic knocks at their door. It was Ayesha, drenched and pale, clutching the doll tight. "It's not mine anymore," she whispered, her eyes wild. "It wants someone new." Before they could respond, she shoved the doll into their arms and fled into the storm. The neighbor called after her, but Ayesha was gone. They looked down at the strange little toy, confused by its sharp grin. That night, they awoke to scratching at their walls, followed by the sound of tiny footsteps creeping toward their bed. No one ever saw Ayesha again. Some say she lost herself to the doll entirely, her soul devoured by its hunger. Others claim she became its servant, wandering town to town, passing it on to the next victim. And as for the Labubu doll, it still circulates, changing hands like a deadly secret. Maybe it's sitting in some attic right now, waiting. Maybe it's already in someone's home. Maybe even yours. So if you ever see that wide-eyed creature with the sharp little grin, don't pick it up. Don't even look at it. Because once you do, it never lets you go.